most people today have never heard of the strange event that almost stopped life on Earth 9,000 years ago. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't a supervolcano. And it wasn't some mythical flood story passed down through legends. It was something far quieter and far more mysterious. Our story begins with a scientist who refused to believe the official explanation. Her name was Dr. Emily Carter, an American climate researcher from Montana. Emily grew up in a small town near Glacier National Park. As a child, she would stare at the massive frozen valleys and ask questions her teachers could never answer. How long has this been melting? How fast did the ice disappear? What really happened here? Those questions stayed with her for years. By the time she was 30, she had become one of the youngest researchers ever admitted to the Paleoclimate Institute in Colorado, a private research facility famous for studying ancient Earth events. But the Institute also had a reputation, a strange one. They studied events no one else cared about: forgotten disasters, unexplained climate shifts, and ancient changes the scientific world rarely discussed. And one day, Emily found something that changed the entire direction of her life. The unlabeled file. Inside the Institute's silent basement archives was a dusty folder with no name, no date, no reference, just a small red sticker on the corner. Curious, Emily opened it. Inside were handwritten notes from the 1960s, photographs of melting ice cores, and a single typed line at the top of the first page. Event threshold, planetary shutdown, 9,000 YBP. She frowned. Planetary shutdown. The Earth almost stopped. The notes described a moment in time when global temperatures crashed so suddenly that weather systems stalled. Oceans slowed. Wind patterns reversed. Entire ecosystems collapsed in months. No major disaster was listed. No explosion. No impact. Just a sudden, unexplained freeze. It didn't make sense. Emily brought the folder to her mentor, Professor Hale, an older climate historian who had been at the Institute since the 80s. When he saw the red sticker, his face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "In the archives," she answered. "What is it?" Hale closed the folder slowly. "It's the reason this institute was created." Emily didn't breathe for a few seconds. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear what he had to say. But she had spent her entire life chasing the questions no one else asked, and she wasn't stopping now. "Tell me," Hale finally spoke. 9,000 years ago, the Earth changed so suddenly that if it had continued just a little longer, the planet's systems would have shut down completely. No wind, no storms, no rainfall patterns, nothing. Emily stared at him. "That's impossible," she said. Hale nodded. "Exactly. That's why nobody talks about it." The warning in the ice. That night, Emily stayed late at the laboratory. She examined one of the oldest ice cores ever collected. A mile-long cylinder of ancient ice pulled from Greenland in the 1970s. The ice was so clear she could see bubbles inside it, tiny pockets of air older than human civilization. She froze when she reached the section labeled 8, 909, 200 YBP. Right there, beneath the fluorescent lights, she saw it. A sudden, dramatic change in the chemical layers. A sharp drop, like a cliff. Emily whispered to herself, "This is real." She checked temperature markers, oxygen levels, dust concentration. Every indicator pointed to the same thing. The Earth had cooled drastically, faster than any natural event could explain. It made no sense at all. Nature doesn't move that quickly. Climate doesn't flip like a switch, unless something triggered it, something we haven't discovered yet. Emily copied the data, printed the graphs, and pinned them on her office board. At 3:17 a.m., she stepped back and looked at everything she had collected, the ice core evidence, the handwritten notes, the mysterious folder. She whispered, "Why doesn't anyone know about this?" A strange pattern appears. The next morning, Emily reviewed the numbers again. Then she saw something she had missed before. Every part of the Earth, North America, Europe, Asia, all showed signs of the same event. But the timing wasn't random. The cooling wave started in one place. It started in North America, right in the center of the continent, right where the ancient ice sheets had once stood. Emily marked the location on a map. The Great Lakes region, but not the lakes we know today. No, 9,000 years ago, the area was covered by a massive body of water that no longer exists. Lake Agassiz, one of the largest lakes in Earth's history. Suddenly, a chilling possibility crept into Emily's mind. Could something have happened to that lake? Something powerful enough to change the entire planet. She needed proof, real proof, and she knew exactly where to find it. The journey begins. The next week, Emily packed her gear, her notebooks, and the mysterious folder. She booked a flight to Minnesota, where the remains of ancient Lake Agassiz still stretched beneath forests, farms, and frozen wetlands. But as she prepared to leave, Professor Hale pulled her aside. "If you go there," he said quietly, "you will find answers. But you may not like them. Some things in the past were never meant to be uncovered." Emily zipped her bag and looked him in the eyes. "That's exactly why I have to go." Hale nodded. "Then be careful." The last researcher who studied this event disappeared. Emily stopped breathing. "What?" "She vanished," Hale said. "Her name was Dr. Marin Hill. She was working on the same files you found." Emily felt a chill run through her spine. What happened to her? No one knows. She left on a field trip to the Agassiz Basin and never came back. Emily swallowed hard, but she didn't back down, because the truth was bigger than fear, and she needed to know. Did the planet nearly shut down? And what caused it? Emily Carter arrived in northern Minnesota on a cold, gray morning. The sky was low and heavy, the kind of winter sky that made everything feel older, like the land itself carried memories. She rolled her suitcase out of the small airport and took a long breath of the icy air. This was her first step into the mystery. The region didn't look dangerous, but Emily could feel something unsettling beneath the calm landscape. She rented a small SUV and drove north into the wilderness, following coordinates she found in the old folder coordinates that matched the last known location of Dr. Marin Hill, the missing researcher. As she drove, she noticed miles of flat, strangely smooth land. To most people, it would look like normal countryside. But Emily knew better. These plains used to be the bottom of a giant ancient lake. Lake Agassiz wasn't just large. It was almost the size of all the Great Lakes combined. And according to the data, something massive happened here. Something that might explain why the Earth nearly froze 9,000 years ago. But first, she needed to understand what happened to Dr. Hill, the abandoned cabin. By late afternoon, Emily reached a remote stretch of land surrounded by tall pine trees. According to the 1960s folder, this was where the missing researcher had conducted field tests. A small wooden cabin built decades ago for climate scientists. The cabin looked untouched, like time had stopped around it. Emily approached slowly. Snow cracked under her boots. She pushed the door open. It creaked loudly. Inside, dust floated through rays of pale light. A metal desk, a broken lantern, scattered papers. Everything looked frozen in the moment Dr. Hill disappeared. Emily whispered, "What happened to you?" She stepped inside and saw notebooks stacked on the desk, covered in dust. She opened the first one. The writing was messy, rushed. The first page read, "Day 14, something is wrong. The readings don't make sense. The ground is vibrating at night. I hear water moving under the land, but there is no water here anymore." Emily felt her heart tighten. The next page, Day 16, the temperature dropped 18 degrees suddenly. Not possible. My instruments are malfunctioning, or something else is happening here. Another page, Day 19. I think the lake is waking up. Emily froze. What did that mean? There were more entries, but something caught her attention. A torn-out page pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. It had only 3 words written in huge, shaky handwriting. It wasn't natural. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. She knew she shouldn't be alone out here, but she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when she was so close. The hidden box. Emily searched the cabin thoroughly. Under the floorboards, beneath rotten wood, she found a small metal lockbox. Inside were older documents, carbon dating reports, chemical analysis sheets, and hand-drawn maps of water movement under the ancient lake. But one sheet stood out. It was stamped with the Institute's symbol and dated 1998. A warning sheet. It said, "Do not conduct deep ground tests in the Agassiz Basin. Instabilities detected. Risk unknown. Unknown risk." Emily shook her head. Why would an ancient lake bed be dangerous? It was dry land, or at least it should be. Suddenly, she heard something outside. A low, distant rumbling, like thunder, but deeper, slower, and coming from under the earth. She froze. The rumble lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. Emily slowly stepped outside, her breath turning to white mist in the cold air. Nothing, just still trees and dead silence. But she knew what she felt. Something moved under the land. Exactly what Dr. Hill wrote about before she vanished. The strange discovery. Behind the cabin stood a small field research station, a metal structure half buried in snow. Emily brushed snow off the door and entered. Inside was a large drilling machine, rusted but functional looking. Next to it were sealed sample containers labeled with dates. Emily opened one. Inside was mud, thick, dark, and strangely warm. Warm. She touched it lightly. Her eyes widened. The soil was hot, even though the air outside was freezing. That made no sense. She checked another container. Same thing, warm soil. Warm as if it had been freshly dug from deep underground. Emily looked around the room until she saw a faded note taped to the wall. In Dr. Hill's handwriting. Heat, pressure, movement. Something is alive under the basin. Emily stepped back, her mind racing. Alive? No, that was impossible. But she couldn't ignore what she felt, what she saw, what the missing scientist had written. Something was happening beneath the ancient lake bed. Something unnatural. Something that had once changed the entire planet. A local witness. Emily left the cabin feeling unsettled but determined. She drove into the nearest town, a quiet place with only a gas station, a diner, and a few houses. Inside the diner, she asked the waitress if she knew anything about a missing scientist. The woman's face tensed. "You mean the lady from the science cabin?" "Yeah, I remember her." "What happened to her?" Emily asked. The waitress lowered her voice. She was asking questions about the old lake. Strange questions. People told her to leave it alone. Couple weeks later, she vanished. State police searched for days. Found her truck near the basin. Empty. Emily swallowed. No body. Nope, not a trace. Just footprints leading toward the dried lake. And then nothing. Nothing. The woman nodded. Footprints stopped, like she walked into thin air. Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was spinning. The waitress leaned in closer. "You want to know something else?" The night before she disappeared, folks heard a loud sound from the ground, like a giant crack opening. Emily felt a chill crawl across her skin. "What do you think happened?" she asked softly. The woman looked out the window toward the dark forest. "I think the land under the basin ain't done with us," she whispered. "And whatever happened 9,000 years ago, maybe it's starting again." Emily's pulse quickened, because that was exactly what she feared. The first clue. That night, Emily returned to her motel and laid out everything she had. Dr. Hill's notes, the heat in the soil, the strange rumbling under the ground, the missing pages, the map of ancient water flow. And then she noticed something she had missed, a repeated symbol drawn beside several locations on Dr. Hill's maps, a circle with 3 jagged lines coming out of it. Emily didn't recognize it, but it looked intentional, like a warning sign. She marked the places on her own map. All the symbols pointed toward one specific location, a remote stretch of the Agassiz basin known as Point Zero, the deepest part of the ancient lake, a place where no researcher had gone in decades. Emily stared at the map. She knew what she had to do next. She had to go to Point Zero. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "That is where Dr. Hill disappeared." Emily closed her notebook. Whatever happened 9,000 years ago, whatever shook the planet and nearly shut it down, the answer was waiting at Point Zero, and she was going to find it, no matter what it cost. The cradle, CRACKS. For thousands of years, the settlement, now buried beneath layers of mud and sand, had thrived peacefully. Its people, quiet, skilled, and deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth, lived by the rise and fall of seasons, by the predictable breath of wind, by the familiar pulse of rivers. Nothing in their world had prepared them for chaos. No warning, no prophecy, no omen foretold what came next. But as the quiet centuries rolled toward their final days, the earth began to whisper. And then it began to scream. The first signs, the elders recorded it in symbols carved into bone tablets, symbols historians wouldn't decipher correctly until millennia later. At first, it was the air, not the temperature, not the clouds, the air itself. Birds that usually slept in the tall reeds along the river stopped returning at dusk. Their absence was followed by strange flight patterns, spirals, rapid dives, sudden migrations in the wrong season. The people didn't understand it, but they felt it. Something was off balance. Then came the water. The clean river that had fed their crops for generations began turning murky. Fish washed ashore by the dozens, silver bodies littering the banks. Hunters noticed animals behaving strangely, deer running in circles, foxes abandoning their dens. Only a few thought it was a sign from the gods. Most believed the earth was changing, breathing differently, preparing for something big, a shadow over The settlement. One night, without a single cloud in the sky, the villagers felt the ground tremble softly. Just a few heartbeats, barely noticeable, yet it was enough to send ripples of fear through every hut. The elders gathered in the central hall, burning resin that filled the air with a thick, bitter smell, a ritual reserved for moments of dire importance. They called it the night the cradle shook. The cradle was what they believed their valley to be, a protected bowl in the hands of the gods, a safe haven, a chosen land. But that night, the cradle cracked. Young children woke crying, claiming they heard a giant moving under the world. Dogs howled without stopping. And far in the distance, beyond the hills and forests, a deep rumble echoed like a warning growl from something ancient. Yet when morning came, everything looked normal. Too normal, unnaturally calm, like the silence after a predator enters the forest. The sky changes last. 3 days later, the sky betrayed them. At sunset, instead of fatting into the usual gold and red, the heavens turned a sickly brownish orange. A dusty haze spread across the horizon, swallowing the sun like a dying flame. No one in generations had seen anything like it. The elders climbed the watchtower carved from old cedar wood. From there, the valley stretched far and wide, normally glowing with green fields and slow-moving rivers. But on that evening, the valley looked bruised. The air tasted metallic. Crops drooped. Even the river seemed to shrink from something. Elder Ruma, the oldest among them, whispered words still preserved in their ancient script. The sky has begun carrying the memory of fire. No one understood what she meant. Not then, but this was the first faint trace of the massive global cooling event scientists in the modern world would one day name the 8.2K event. The people living through it, they just called it the Great Dimness. The strangers arrived. The settlement was not entirely isolated. Once every season, traders from far-off regions traveled through the valley. They brought obsidian blades, colorful shells, strange dried fruits, things the villagers had never seen but always welcomed. On the 7th day after the strange sky, the traders returned. But something was different. Their clothes were torn, their feet blistered, their faces gaunt and wild, and they carried no goods, only stories, terrible stories. They spoke of a faraway ice sea, a massive frozen world beyond mountains and forests, where something unthinkable had happened. The ice, they said, was breaking, melting, rumbling, roaring like a living beast. Enormous walls of ice, bigger than the traders had ever imagined, were collapsing into the ocean. It caused storms that came from the wrong direction, floods that swallowed entire hunting grounds, winds so cold they burned exposed skin. The villagers listened in stunned silence. No one asked if the traders were exaggerating. The fear in their trembling hands said enough. Something was happening far beyond their land. Something unstoppable. Something coming for them next. The mark in the river. The next morning, the villagers noticed something impossible. The river had lowered by almost a full meter overnight, without drought, without heat, without warning. Water simply vanished. Where did it go? No one knew. But when the hunters followed the river upstream, they found the answer waiting for them. A section of the riverbank had collapsed inward, pulled down into the earth as though swallowed by an unseen mouth. The collapse stretched for almost half a kilometer. The land had split open. Dark mud, once hidden beneath layers of fertile topsoil, now glistened under the sun like exposed flesh. This was no normal erosion, no seasonal shift. The earth was rearranging itself, and the villagers realized the terrifying truth. If the river was changing, their future was changing too. A decision must be made. The elders convened again. This time, there was no quiet debate, no gentle discussion. Voices rose. Fear cracked through the mask of calm wisdom. Should they stay, pack their ancient homes, abandon the valley that had fed them for generations, or wait and hope the sky cleared, wait and pray the river returned, wait and trust the gods to seal the cradle again? Many argued that leaving meant disrespecting their ancestors. Others whispered that staying meant death. But before the council reached a decision, nature made it for them. The final sign, on the night before the settlement's fate was sealed, a storm rose without warning. No lightning, no thunder, just violent winds that tore through huts and uprooted young trees. Winds colder than anything they had felt in living memory. People huddled together, praying, crying, clutching their children. And then, as the storm reached its peak, the ground trembled again, harder this time, longer, angrier. It was the second crack of the cradle. When dawn came, the settlement was half ruined, roofs scattered, walls broken. The river widened, and the valley felt unfamiliar. The people stood in silence. Every face reflected the same realization. Their home was no longer safe. It was time to leave, time to walk away from a world that no longer belonged to them. The valley that had sheltered them for generations now felt like the lair of a sleeping monster. One wrong step, one wrong sound, and the earth itself might awaken again. The decision to leave was made with heavy hearts, but everyone agreed. Staying meant extinction, and so began one of the oldest forgotten migrations in human history. An exodus no modern historian could ever fully reconstruct. Yet its echoes remain beneath layers of silt, bones, and ash across continents. They left at sunrise, not because it was symbolic, but because the night had become unpredictable. The abandoned valley. The villagers stood on a ridge, overlooking the place that had given them food, shelter, stories, and life itself. Smoke still curled from the remains of huts shattered in the midnight storm. The river, once calm and predictable, churned with mud and broken branches. The valley looked wounded, alive but in pain. No one spoke. There were no rituals for leaving one's ancestral home, no words for abandoning the cradle of your entire existence. The children cried quietly. The elders stood like cracked statues. And the warriors, brave, hardened men, couldn't hide their trembling hands. Finally, Elder Ruma whispered, "May the valley sleep again one day." No one looked back after that. The journey begins. They walked north at first, following the old hunting paths used by their ancestors. But even those paths felt strange now. Trees bent unnaturally, the air sharp and cold, the soil wet and unstable. Every few kilometers, they encountered signs of collapse, fallen cliffs, swallowed patches of forest, cracked earth that leaked warm steam. Nature was rearranging itself right in front of them. But the worst signs were the others, other groups, other clans, other wanderers, dozens of them, ragged and exhausted, walking the same direction with hollow eyes. Many spoke of disasters far beyond the valley. Our lake froze in the middle of summer. The ground opened and swallowed half our crops. The sea rose and took our homes. The storms, they don't stop anymore. It wasn't just their valley. It was the entire world. And none of them understood what was coming. The great cold wave. On the fourth night of travel, the temperature dropped so sharply that it felt like someone had pulled the warmth out of the air. Fires wouldn't stay lit. Breath crystallized instantly. Even the stars looked dimmer. The children huddled against their mothers as freezing winds howled across the plains. Elder Ruma, who had seen more winters than anyone else, whispered a single sentence that chilled the hearts of everyone around her. "This is not winter. This is something older." Modern scientists would later identify this sudden cooling as the beginning of the 8.2 K global cold wave, triggered by massive freshwater floods rushing into the North Atlantic. But for the wandering clans, it felt like the world had tilted into darkness. The first casualty, on the sixth day, one of the oldest men in the group collapsed. He had gathered food for decades, taught children the secrets of the forest. Now the cold stole his breath. They carried him to a sheltered grove, hoping rest would revive him. But as dawn broke, his body didn't move. There was no sickness, no wound, just cold, cold that killed without mercy. His burial was silent. No chants, no songs, only the sound of wind ripping through the trees like an ancient cry. For the first time, fear turned into despair. The Whispering Lake. They continued walking until they reached a massive lake, one larger than anything they had ever seen. It shimmered strangely under the gray sky, perfectly still, as though untouched by the stormy world around it. But something felt wrong. Too quiet, too calm, too pale. When one of the hunters dipped his hand into the water, he recoiled in horror. The water was freezing, ice cold, even though the air was only mildly chilly. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the sound. Every few seconds, a deep rumble rolled across the lake, like distant thunder beneath the water. Small ripples appeared out of nowhere, but there was no wind. The lake was moving from the inside. Something is rising, one woman whispered. Or breaking. They didn't stay long enough to find out. SIGNS in the sky. 2 days after the lake, the sky changed again. The clouds thinned and stretched unnaturally, forming long, horizontal bands across the horizon. Streaks of gray and brown cut through the atmosphere. Some of the villagers believed these were messages from the gods' anger, sadness, warnings. But Elder Ruma, who always seemed to know more than she should, muttered softly, "The sky is choking." It was the release of glacial dust, massive quantities carried by winds across entire continents, saturating the air and dimming the sunlight. But to the traveling clans, it meant only one thing. The world was becoming unfamiliar, alien, hostile, wild. The discovery, on the 11th day, after crossing a barren hill ridge, they saw something that none of them could explain. A structure buried halfway in the ground, as if the earth had swallowed it once and spat it back out. It wasn't built like their homes. It wasn't made of wood or clay. It was stone, massive slabs arranged in a circular pattern. Some stood upright like pillars. Others had fallen, but all of them were carved with intricate, swirling symbols. Symbols no one in their group recognized. The elders approached cautiously, touching the cold stone. "It's old," whispered one. "Older than our oldest stories," whispered another. This was a place of power, a place that had once belonged to a civilization they didn't even know existed. They had discovered one of the earliest megalithic sites, a precursor to the stone temples that would appear thousands of years later. How long had it been buried? Who built it? Why here? Why now? They had no answers, only awe and fear. The hunters insisted they leave before nightfall. No one argued, but as they walked away, Elder Ruma looked back at the carvings, her face pale under the dimming sky. She whispered something no one heard, and for the rest of her life, she never spoke of the stones again. The final message of part 4. That night, as they camped far from the mysterious site, the earth trembled again, this time longer, stronger, as if something vast and ancient was shifting beneath them. The children cried, the mothers prayed, the elders clutched the earth like it was slipping away. And then a new fear emerged. They were being followed. The shaking didn't stop, even after the tribe had moved miles away from the stone circle. Tremors rippled beneath their feet like distant drums. It felt as though something massive and unseen was crawling under the earth, searching, shifting, awakening. But the trembling wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the shadows. The first, SIGHTNG. It happened near dusk. The sky was streaked with cold pink light as the group prepared their camp. Hunters were sharpening flint blades. Mothers wrapped their children in thick hides. Others began stacking stones for wind shelter. Then a young boy screamed. Everyone turned. He pointed toward the ridge they had crossed hours earlier. At first, no one saw anything. Then movement. Dark figures, 4, maybe 5, standing absolutely still at the top of the ridge. Silhouettes against the dying sun. They weren't from their group. They weren't from any nearby clan. And they didn't move like ordinary travelers. They stood like watchers, observers, silent and sharp, as if measuring the tribe's every action. The hunters grabbed their spears. The elders whispered prayers. Children hid behind their mothers. But when the wind shifted, the figures stepped back and vanished into the tree line. Maybe they're lost, a woman suggested. No, Elder Ruma replied, her voice firm. They know exactly where they're going. A world of WANDRRS. Over the next few days, the tribe saw more signs of other groups moving across the land, broken footprints near rivers, newly cut branches, abandoned hearths still warm with ash, but none left such perfect, silent tracks as the watchers on the ridge. Who were they? Where were they going? And why did they appear only when the earth trembled? No one had answers, but worry spread like frostbite. Even the strongest warriors began glancing over their shoulders during the long march. The world was emptying of animals, forests, and warmth, but filling with people who moved like ghosts. The forest of breathing trees. On the 12th day, the migrating tribe entered the thickest forest they had ever seen. Towering trees, almost too tall to believe, loomed overhead like ancient guardians. But the forest was wrong. The air was heavy, moist, warm, too warm for the cold world around them. Steam rose from the forest floor in pale wisps, and the trunks, they vibrated, at first gently, then stronger when the tremors came. It felt as if the trees were breathing. One of the children pressed her ear against a trunk. Her eyes widened. "It's alive," she whispered. "Everything is alive," Elder Ruma said. "But this is awake." As they continued through the forest, they saw enormous cracks in the ground, some wide enough to swallow a deer. The roots of trees dangled over them like giant veins. Warm air blew from the cracks, carrying a strange smell, like burning stone mixed with something metallic. The hunters exchanged looks. Something deep underground had shifted. Something massive. The WANDRRS return. That night, as the tribe slept in the forest clearing, a faint tapping sound echoed through the trees. Tap, 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 like stones knocking together. The hunters woke instantly, quietly leaving their shelters and creeping toward the sound. Then they saw them, the watchers, again, but this time closer, standing just at the edge of camp. Tall, thin, wrapped in dark furs, faces painted in black ash, eyes reflecting firelight like animals. One of them raised a hand slowly, as if signaling. The tribe tensed. Then In a voice rough as gravel, the figure spoke. "We walk the falling earth," the stranger said. "Like you, the clans of the Bryaking North." It turned out they were survivors too. They came from a land far to the north, where ice mountains crumbled into the sea and storms ripped through the skis like claws. Their clan had once been mighty, hundreds strong. Now only 6 remained. "We search for stable land," their leader said. "There is none left." Their stories tore through the tribe like a cold wind. Whole forests frozen solid in an hour. Hunting grounds swallowed by rising seas. Giant glacial rivers bursting without warning, flattening everything. And worst of all, the sky turning white for 3 whole days. "No sun," one of the strangers whispered. "No warmth, only white." Elder Ruma's eyes narrowed at this. She knew something the others didn't, something she wasn't ready to say aloud. A warning DLVRED in the dark. The northern survivors didn't want food. They didn't want shelter. They wanted to warn. "The earth is choosing a new shape," the leader said, "and humans are not part of its choice." Silence fell over the clearing. The strangers continued. "Fire under the ice is waking. The sea is rising. The sun is fatting." None of these people knew anything about ancient climate shifts, freshwater pulses, or ocean circulation collapse. They only knew what they saw, and what they saw terrified them. Soon, the leader whispered, "The world will close in on itself." Elder Ruma stiffened. "What do you mean?" she asked. The leader looked at her with eyes that seemed ancient, far older than any human she had ever met. "The planet will try to sleep," the leader said, "and the sleep will be long. The deal in the night." The tribe discussed for hours. Should they let these people travel with them? Some feared they would bring danger. Others felt safety in numbers. But Elder Ruma said one thing that silenced everyone. "They know what is coming, and knowledge is worth more than food or shelter." The clans joined forces. 2 groups, once strangers, now bound by fear and the collapsing world around them. But as they prepared to rest, the ground shook again, this time longer, heavier, so powerful that even the massive trees groaned under the force. Everyone clung to the earth as it rolled like a living creature. And through the shaking, one thought echoed among them. How much worse can it get? They would soon learn, because the next morning they would reach the place no human should ever see. A place ancient, forbidden, and full of answers the world wasn't ready for. The next morning looked wrong. The sky wasn't gray anymore. It wasn't blue either. It was a pale, sickly silver, like the inside of a seashell, dipped in ash. Light flickered strangely across the treetops, as if the sun had lost its shape. The joined clans marched in uneasy silence. No birds, no wind, no insects, just the sound of boots crunching over frozen leaves. Then, around midday, the forest ended abruptly, as if it had been sliced clean by a giant blade. Beyond the tree line, lay a vast, empty plain of cracked earth, stretching farther than the eye could see. Steam hissed through thin fractures in the ground. Pools of water bubbled like boiling soup. Dark smoke rose from distant fissures. It looked like the earth itself had opened its skin. The northern leader stepped forward slowly. "This," he said, "is where the land began to die. The edge of the scar." The tribes approached the edge of the plain cautiously. Heat radiated from the cracks, despite the cold air. A humming sound vibrated under the ground, deep, steady, unnatural. Every time a tremor passed, the sound grew louder. "It's breathing," whispered one of the women. Elder Ruma shook her head. "No, it's warning," the hunters suggested, going around the plain. But the northern survivors insisted they must cross. "The answers lie in the center," their leader said. "You must see what we saw." The elders debated, but the earth made the decision for them. A violent tremor tore through the ground behind them, splitting open a massive crevice where they had stood moments earlier. They moved forward. There was no choice. The crossing, the plain felt haunted. Every crack hissed like whispering voices. Every step felt like stepping on hollow ground. In some places, the earth dipped inward, forming huge circular depressions, as if giant footprints had been left centuries ago and hardened to stone. Children clung to their parents. Even the warriors walked with trembling hands. As they reached the middle of the plain, they saw it. A cavern entrance, massive, perfectly round, not made by water or wind, made intentionally. The stone around it was smooth and strangely polished, like glass that had been melted and then cooled. The opening itself descended into a soft blue glow. "It wasn't here before," said one of the northern clan. "We watched it open. No one wanted to enter, but something instinct, fate, or the earth's own pull drew them closer." And then Elder Ruma spoke. "We go down together." The descent, the cavern was wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. The air grew cold quickly, so cold it stung their lungs. But the deeper they went, the stranger it became. Stone walls turned smooth, then curved, then carved. Symbols appeared on the surfaces, spirals, circles, repeated patterns. Not random markings, not decorations. Language, the same kind of carvings they had seen days earlier at the megalithic stones. Someone had carved messages deep under the earth, long before their tribes had ever existed. The deeper they walked, the warmer the air became again. A glowing mist rose from below, and the humming, that constant, deep vibration, grew louder. "What is this place?" whispered a hunter. The northern leader replied, "The end of the beginning, the chamber." Finally, the cavern opened into an enormous underground chamber, and what stood in the center froze every heart in the room. A structure, a massive one, built of smooth stone and strange black rock that didn't look natural. A temple, a monument, A warning. The structure had 3 pillars rising from its center, each carved with thousands of symbols spiraling toward the peak. Blue light flowed from grooves in the stone, illuminating the entire chamber with an eerie glow. The floor around it was carved into perfect circles, 7 of them, each larger than the last. Elder Ruma's eyes widened. "This is older than our stories," she whispered. "Older than human memory." The northern leader closed his eyes slowly. "This is what opened when the earth shook, and it was not the first time." The map of AGES. As the clans approached the monument, the symbols on the pillars began to make sense. Not because they could read them, but because they recognized patterns. Carvings showed a massive sheet of ice collapsing, enormous waves crossing entire continents, a sun dimming, a cold world, people wandering, structures sinking beneath rising water, fire bursting from under glaciers, and in the center, a circle labeled with markings that Elder Ruma recognized from both the stones and the sky. "This is time," she whispered, "a cycle of ages." Their world collapsing wasn't random. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't a curse. It was part of a cycle that had happened before and would happen again. The final warning. In the innermost circle was a large symbol shaped like a broken sun. The northern leader touched it with his fingertips. "This was carved by those who lived before the great ice," he said. "Before even our oldest memories." Everyone stared at him. "How do you know?" a hunter asked. The leader opened a small leather pouch around his neck. Inside was a fragment of black stone carved with the same symbol. "We found this in the north," he said, "in a place where the ground split open and swallowed our village." Elder Ruma stepped closer, examining it. Then she noticed something. The stone wasn't just carved. It was scorched, as if burned by flame, hotter than any fire humans could create. "Who built this?" she whispered. The northern leader shook his head. "Not us. Not any of the clans. Those who lived before the world froze. Those who knew the planet would sleep." The realization. The humming grew louder, so loud the ground shook with every pulse. One of the children cried out, "It's waking up." Elder Ruma knelt beside the girl. "No," she said softly. "It's warning us. This happened before, and whatever happened next destroyed them." The northern leader pointed to the outermost circle. The carvings showed fire swallowing the sky, not from above, but from below. Volcanoes, earthquakes, collapse. The earth nearly shut down once, 9,000 years ago, and they were witnessing the beginning of the next cycle. The SHKING, BGINS again. A thunderous crack split the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. The blue light flickered violently. The 3 pillars vibrated as the ground rolled like waves beneath their feet. "Run," Elder Ruma screamed. The clans grabbed their children and sprinted toward the tunnel as the chamber collapsed behind them. Stone shattered. The monument groaned. The earth roared like a living beast. Something ancient was awakening, something that had slept too long, something the world wasn't ready to face. Behind them, the chamber glowed brighter, as if the monument was preparing for something, something final. The earth didn't stop shaking. As the clans raced through the tunnels, the stone floor buckled beneath their feet. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe or even see. Children cried. Warriors shouted. The humming grew louder and louder, no longer a whisper beneath the soil, but a roar like a giant heart beating deep inside the planet. They burst out of the cavern mouth, just as the ground behind them collapsed entirely, swallowing the entrance in a thunderous explosion of dust and shattered rock. Everyone stared as the plain split open in a massive zigzag crack stretching for miles. "We need to move," Elder Ruma yelled, waving them forward. "Now." But as they ran, the crack began glowing. A soft, blue-white light rose from the depths, the same shade they had seen inside the chamber. Slowly, silently, it pulsed like a heartbeat. The northern leader stared in horror. "It's the pillars," he whispered. "The world below, SBAKS." The glowing spread sideways across the plain, outlining invisible shapes beneath the earth. Circles, lines, patterns, as if an enormous structure, ancient, geometric, and alive, was hidden beneath their feet. Elder Ruma recognized the design instantly. "It's the map," she breathed. "The circles from the chamber, there under the ground." The clans backed away in fear. This wasn't a place built by humans. It wasn't natural. It wasn't even understandable. It was something older, something that had survived the last time Earth nearly shut down. A part of the planet's memory, a message carved into the bedrock. And now it was waking up. The earth takes its breath. Suddenly, the ground stopped shaking. Everyone froze. The silence was worse than the tremors. It felt unnatural, stretched wrong, like the moment between a heartbeat and the next. Children clung to their parents. Even the warriors stood as still as stone. The northern leader whispered, "The planet is inhaling." Before anyone could ask what he meant, it happened. A violent burst of wind exploded upward through the glowing cracks, sending dust into a swirling vortex. Trees bent, leaves spiraled into the sky. The whole world seemed to scream with the noise of it. The earth was breathing out, a long, painful exhale. And then, from the deepest part of the crack, came a sound none of them would ever forget. Not the wind, not rock, not fire. A low, echoing moan, like the cry of something enormous buried beneath the crust. Some of the tribe fell to their knees. Others covered their ears. "It's alive," whispered one of the elders. "The earth is alive." Elder Ruma corrected him. "No, it is remembering." The second collapse. A blast of heat surged through the plain, melting snow in seconds. Steam shot into the air. The soil rippled like liquid. Then, boom, a tremor stronger than any before threw people to the ground. The glowing lines pulsed brighter, spreading outward until they reached the tree line. The northern leader grabbed Elder Ruma's shoulder. "This is only the beginning," he shouted. "We must get to high ground." The clans ran, climbing the ridge at the edge of the plain, as the entire landscape behind them lifted, as if something beneath the earth was rising. But what rose was not a creature. It was water, the great release. From cracks miles long, boiling water erupted upward, creating fountains that reached into the sky. Water from underground aquifers, water trapped beneath ice, water heated by forces older than humankind. The steam clouds billowed and expanded into the frozen sky. Within minutes, the entire plain was drowning in white fog. Nobody could see more than a few steps ahead. Warriors tied children together so they wouldn't get lost. Mothers covered their mouths with cloth. The clans held hands, forming chains as they pushed through the blinding storm. Finally, they reached a rocky ridge. Just as they looked back, the plain collapsed, like a giant lung deflating. The water drained, the steam vanished, the light faded, a silence fell again, and underneath it all, the humming stopped, the return of the sun. Then something miraculous happened. The sky brightened, not silver, not white, but golden, the warm gold of a rising morning sun. The clouds parted. For the first time in weeks, sunlight, true sunlight, hit their faces. Elder Ruma cried openly. Children laughed. The northern clan fell to their knees. As the golden light spread across the ruined landscape, the tribes felt warmth on their skin, a gentle warmth that seemed almost impossible. The earth was calming. The trembling had ended. The breathing had steadied. Whatever cycle had awakened was closing again. The planet had come close to shutting down, but it had stopped just in time. What the stones left behind. In the sunlight, they could finally see the plain clearly. Where the ground had ruptured, a new symbol had been carved by earth and heat. The same broken sun, symbol from the chamber. No human had carved it. Nature, or whatever intelligence shaped the cycle, had etched it itself. "This is not the end," Elder Ruma muttered. "It is a warning for the next people, a mark for the future." No one understood what she meant, but in time, those marks would be buried. Snow and soil would hide them. Generations would forget. And thousands of years later, scientists, people like Emily, would find pieces of the truth. The new world begins. For now, the tribes moved on. Days passed. The air warmed. Animals returned. Small rivers formed where ice had melted. The world was fragile, wounded, but alive. One night, under a clear starry sky, Elder Ruma gathered the clans and spoke. "This earth is not just land. It is memory. It sleeps, it wakes, and it warns those who listen." She held up the black stone with the broken sun symbol. We will protect this. We will pass the story to every child so the world never forgets its breath again. The clans nodded, and under the endless sky, in a world reborn, the survivors began a new journey, one that would shape myths, legends, and forgotten histories. Their footsteps would fade, their monuments would crumble, but the story, the warning, would wait beneath the earth, waiting for the next time the planet trembled, waiting for the next watcher to uncover the truth, waiting for someone, thousands of years later, to finally ask, did the planet nearly shut down 9,000 years ago? And to hear the answer whispered in the stones, yes, and it will try again.